So this isn't one of those videos where we're going to talk about a lot of the statistical information or things that are happening inside of Portugal or Europe as a whole. I really wanted to talk with you about what happens, I think, to expats, especially when they live out of the country for maybe 3 years or more. There's been a lot of talk about what they call the honeymoon phase. You know, the first year you've left the country, it's all exciting, it's all new, you're running around, it's so much fun, everything seems like a completely different experience. And this is, I think, also something that's different for, well, it's probably true for people who are digital nomads who are going country to country every 6 months to a year. But I think once you have been out of the country for about 3 years, something happens, and it could just be something small, but it's really just kind of a buildup of all of the little things that have happened over a long period of time since you left, and you realize kind of what you've been focusing for 3 years on all of the wonderful attributes of living outside of the country and exploring the world, and then about 3 years in, something happens, and it could be small, it could be, you know, you have camera equipment or a piece of electronics that you got in the US, you know, and it's not working, or you need to get it fixed, whatever it is, and there's no easy way of doing it where you're at, or replacing it quickly or simply. You get bogged down in the local bureaucracy. All of those things that at first seemed small and tedious, you come to a point where you stop and you reevaluate, God, you know, how important those things are to your daily life. There's really another way of saying it, because everything seems to be going really well, you enjoy all of that, but then it comes to a point where you think, God, you know, it would just be so much easier in the US. If I was doing this in the US, I would not have this problem. If I was in the US, I could just simply go in there and replace this, I could take care of this, I could have this done. And you start to think, wow, you know, I live outside the US. Now I file taxes in 2 different countries. Now I have all of these restrictions on when I can leave the country and how long I have to be in the country, and the country is the size of New Jersey, and if you wanted to go to New York, you could only do that certain months out of the year because you have to be inside the country for the rest of the time. And you start thinking about all of these things that are really wonderful experiences, but at the same time it's like there's so many restrictions and demands that come with it at the same time that it can also make you feel really restricted and confined, because you don't have that freedom of movement like you would in the US, where you could just come and go at will. You have limitations that are really put on you for how long you have to be in the country, what you can do, and all of these things. And plus, every time you go in to do something, it's always in a second language. So no matter how accommodating, and people here are incredibly accommodating, it still is frustrating because it's not in your native language. The processes, the way things work, are not the way that you might think. And at first it's interesting and fascinating, and then you may come to a point where you have a problem which should be quickly and easily solved, but will take forever. So maybe you just need a copy of an insurance document, and maybe that takes 5 days and 15 phone calls and 7 emails and 3 holidays, and before from the first time they respond till they actually send you the documentation requested. You know, it could be all of those things. You could request a change of address from the bank or whatever it is. They just will take forever and require multiple changes. And those kind of things you end up having to kind of power through. But they're not things that are as easy as they would be if you were living in the US. Also, on a counterpoint though, there are things here that are easier than they are in the US. So for example, if you drive into a parking garage and you have, it's like an easy pass in the US, or if you have a toll booth pass on your car, you can drive right in. The arm will go up on the parking garage, and when you leave, it'll tabulate the amount of money that you spent in the garage, and off you go again. So there are a lot of benefits to being out here as well. But you do, I think, after 3 years, you'll have that moment where you will stop and think to yourself, is this just really worth it? because filing the double taxes, doing all of these extra things, having the limitations about movement placed on you, the second language, all these things kind of come to a point where you really have to stop and evaluate and really add up the pluses for continuing with that and the minuses for going back. And I think that's why you do see some people who in the end return. I think they get frustrated and they don't, maybe they do or don't really sit down and figure out what is exactly important to them or valuable to them. Because no matter whether or not you're in the US or whether or not in Europe, you're going to be facing some of these same challenges. And if you go back to the US, there will be things about being in the US that really frustrated you that have not changed either. And no matter what you do, you really have to look at those and kind of balance it out. Because if you've left the country and you're living in South America, or if you're living in Asia or Europe, and you're still working full-time, you're going to find that your job opportunities are severely limited comparing to what they would be if you were in the United States. If you're working for a United States company, you are really tethered to that company, because if you leave it, if you're not a total freelancer, then you're going to have to go through that whole process of identifying another company, going through that hiring process, acknowledging that you're living overseas, all these kind of different things that come with that. Will that be okay? So there are a lot of things that people don't necessarily think about. And then you have a lot of people who have YouTube channels, and they're really focused on selling you packages for moving overseas. So they will have FIRE programs or financial freedom programs, and they will offer you packages to work through all the paperwork to move, and they will tell you how incredibly inexpensive it is to live overseas, which in most instances are highly overrated. It's really, the price differences are there, yes, but they are not what a lot of the people who are trying to sell you programs will tell you. Lisbon, for example, is not the same as living in a small town in the northeast sector of Portugal. It's simply not the same. The price points are not the same. Just as living in New York City and living in a small town in Missouri are not going to be the same price points. So you may find commonality in what you pay for certain food items, but you will also find huge differences in what you would pay in taxes, what you might earn for a living, and what you might pay for something like housing. So these are a lot of things that a lot of people should really stop and think about before they decide to move overseas, because once you've been overseas for a few years, you will find yourself stopping and really analyzing that, and then reintegrating yourself into America and working remotely versus returning to an in-office job inside the country are, again, two really very different things. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm wondering if other people have experienced some of these same things, and if so, please leave your comments down below. Thanks. Bye now.